All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you all so much for spending a little time with us this morning. This is Relationships and Expectations in the Time of COVID. What do students say? We so appreciate you being here with us for about the next half hour or so to explore this important topic with us. It's great to see so many familiar friends on this Friday morning. If we haven't met, my name is Dr. Jen DeForest. I'm a partnership lead here at YouthTruth. Prior to joining YouthTruth, I was a high school principal in New York City and an instructor at Harvard. After that, I was a professor at University of Virginia. My passion is really about bridging that research practice divide. I'm very happy to also introduce this morning my fellow traveler in all things YouthTruth, Jimmy Simpson.
Hi everyone, my name is Jimmy Simpson Jr. and I come from a family of educators. My mom, she is a preschool teacher on a Native American reservation in Nebraska. My brother is a teacher. My sister is a professor at the University of Hawaii. And prior to coming to YouthTruth, I was a science and gardening teacher at an elementary school in San Francisco Unified. Now, I work with educators all across the country, helping them use student and stakeholder perception data to really drive change. And my passion for this work really lies in seeing how student voice data can really illuminate and eliminate inequities in our schools. We're also joined by our wonderful Deputy Director, Sonia Heisters. She's going to be monitoring the chat as we go through today, so at the chat and the Q&A. So please feel free to put in some questions and reflections as we go through this data today.
So our discussion this morning rests on a deceptively simple headline: teacher relationships and expectations matter. Indeed, how students experience their relationships with their teachers and how they experience their teachers' expectations are fundamental to both students' social emotional development and their academic success. We were inspired to explore this topic at this moment in time, as we have noticed provocative trends over the past year in the time of COVID in the key measures in our survey of the student experience. And while Jimmy will give you a brief introduction to the trends across these measures, it is the emergent trends around relationships and teacher expectations in particular that hold our eye today. To investigate how students' perceptions of teacher relationships and expectations have been shifting during the pandemic, we started by comparing trends in our pre-COVID data to what we heard from students about their experiences this fall. Keep in mind that this data is from our secondary student respondents. We are excited to share with you this morning just 5 insights from this work. In addition to our 5 insights, we will also offer what we see as 5 teacher expectation opportunities, places where we have seen positive directionality that might be harnessed by schools to provide what we are thinking of as educational lift as we work our way out of the pandemic. To temper any Pollyanna tendencies we might bring to these opportunities, we have also paired each of these opportunities for lift with a little dash of cold water. In particular, we will temper our optimism by also offering some caveats to show that in most instances where there seem to be some lift, there are also inequities that present challenges buried in the good news. Okay, before we dive into these 5 insights, Jimmy has a quick activity to get us thinking together about the student experience this year.
So we're going to do, instead of doing a Zoom poll, we're just going to do a little bit of an internal poll. But before we do that, I just want to introduce some of the key measures of our secondary student survey that mentioned. So these 6 measures of the student are 6 measures of the student experience that research really tells us relates directly to student achievement as well as student emotional well-being. So these key measures are students' perceptions of engagement, academic challenge, belonging and peer collaboration, school culture, college and career readiness, and where we're finally going to focus all of our attention today, students' perceptions of relationships, which describes the quality of teacher support and personal attention. So I'm going to walk you through each one of these just pretty quickly, and I want you to just keep in your mind's eye whether you think students' perceptions of these themes have improved or declined, or if the direction is unclear since the pandemic began. So I'll say that again. I want you to think about whether these students' perceptions have changed and how they've changed since the COVID-19 pandemic. So in this theme of engagement, as we think about what that means to students, Do we think that those have improved, declined, or we're unsure? You can put that in the chat if you'd like to. So what we've been seeing is that students' perceptions of engagement have really declined since the pandemic started. What about academic challenge? Are students feeling challenged by the coursework that they are getting in school, in distance learning, or learning while in COVID? What we see here in academic challenge is that the direction here is a little bit unclear. At the very beginning of the pandemic in spring, in March, April, May, June of 2020, we actually saw that during emergency distance learning, perceptions of academic challenge started to rise a little bit. But now as we've as we've left fall 2020, we see that rise tempering off and things have become a little bit more unpredictable. Now, what about culture? Where do we think students' perceptions of culture have changed? Have they gone up? Have they gone down? Are we unsure? So students' perceptions of culture, which are around respect and discipline, students' perceptions of this have really gone up. We're seeing across the board, elementary, middle, and high, that students' perceptions of culture are improving while they've been learning during the COVID-19 pandemic. What about belonging and peer collaboration? Now, thinking about students' sense of belonging and friendship, as well as their ability to collaborate with their classmates in school. This one probably is the most obvious. Students' perceptions of this are really going down. Students are craving more time with their friends, with their classmates, and really losing a little bit of that sense of belonging in their school. What about college and career readiness? As you might think here, ties along with belonging, peer collaboration, and academic challenge, students' perceptions of college and career readiness are also going down. And then finally, where we're spending our time today, in relationships. Do you think they're going up, down, unsure? Well, as we will see today, students' perceptions of relationships are really improving. They're noting that they are able to interact with their teachers on a more personal level. They're saying that teachers are willing to help them. And so we're going to dive a little bit more into this specific data around student-teacher relationships for the rest of today. Back over to you, Jen.
Great, thank you so much for that context. Okay, before we look at these 5 insights, one more provocation. We would like to offer our framing for a theoretical framework that is helping us to organize our thinking about teacher relationships and expectations over the course year. Many of you surely recognize CASEL's now seemingly ubiquitous framework for social emotional learning. We at YouthTruth have often noticed that when using this framework, our field tends to rush to the center of the model to focus almost exclusively on individual students and individual students' development of those important cell capacities that make up the center of this orange. Today, we would like to direct your attention to the important outer rings of the model as we put at the center what holds those elements together, the culture and climate of our schools. And again, our focus today will be on an investigation of teacher relationships and expectations as part of those rings. All right, with all that context, let's turn to our 5 insights from the time of COVID, explore a few possible opportunities for educational lift, and consider some of those persistent cold water challenges. Back over to you, Jimmy.
So the first insight that we'd like to share today demonstrates the importance of those SEL outer rings and the importance of sometimes laying our unit of analysis around the school. So in short, we want to offer the simple insight that teachers' expectations are embedded in the culture of school. So we find that in schools where staff report that their school sets high expectations for students, students are more likely to report that their teachers set high expectations for them. Let me say that plainly. High expectation schools equal high expectation teachers. Now, while this may seem a bit self-evident, it's a good reminder to principals and instructional leaders that you have an important part in building this culture of high expectations for your students. And relatedly, in our pre-COVID to fall 2020 analysis, we find that students agree at a greater rate that their teachers' expectations make them want to do their best. 51% of students report this prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, while that percentage improves 5% in fall of 2020. This improvement marks our first opportunity for lift as we move through and hopefully out of the pandemic. Now, as one of our partners recently asked when they saw this same lift in their school's data, they said, "This is so critical. I think this has gone up tremendously since we are literally in students' living rooms. Would love to hear about the strategies used to duplicate this once we return." So how can we use this data as a point of inquiry for deeper questioning and conversations with our students? What can we do to maintain these improved perceptions of teacher expectations?
The second insight we'd like to share today addresses whether students perceive that their teachers care if they are really learning. As you can see, this measure has also improved from pre-COVID to fall 2020, rising from 47% to 55%, offering a second opportunity to build on positive momentum as we lift our schools out of the time of COVID. It is notable that this momentum is particularly pronounced at the middle school level. As you can see in the orange bars, middle schools have experienced an impressive increase of 11%. In comparison, as you can see in the gray bars, high schools have only enjoyed an increase of 4%. In this instance, we wanted to be sure to remove our rose-colored glasses for a moment to splash our faces with cold water as we temper this opportunity for lift with that challenge. To this end, we went back to YouthTruth's aggregate data set to also investigate trends in the differences between groups of students. What we wanted to see was if there are any gaps among student demographic groups about whether their teachers care if they're really learning. We noted that when we look at YouthTruth's aggregate data, that students who report getting A's and B's are statistically more likely to report that their teachers care if they are really learning than their classmates who earn C's and D's. Since we are all rightly concerned during this period with student persistence and graduation rates, particularly for those who entered the pandemic already struggling, I want to restate that in another way. Students who report getting C's and D's are statistically less likely than their high-achieving classmates to report that their teachers care if they are really learning.
So the third insight that we want to share is related to teachers' belief in their students. Now, when asked about their teachers' encouragement to persist when the work gets hard, students in fall 2020 were, again, more likely to agree that their teachers are not letting them give up in the face of challenges, an improvement of 8 percentage points from pre-COVID. So too, was there a slight yet heartening increase in students' perceptions of whether teachers believe they can get a good grade when they try, which is, of course, a critical marker of a teacher's support for student self-efficacy. So again, we are struck by the opportunity to maintain these increasingly positive perceptions that students have about their teachers' belief in them beyond the pandemic. But here again, we would like to couple this opportunity for lift with a challenge as we more deeply investigate this question to ask which students report that their teachers believe that they can get a good grade if they try. Now, while there was improvement in students' perceptions across the board, we note that when we look at the YouthTruth aggregate data, that it is our white students who are statistically more likely to report that their teachers believe they can get a good grade if they try. And as one recent YouthTruth participant reflected on this, she asks the important question, are teachers' intended expectations for each student the same? What is communicated to students by race suggests a differentiated impact.
Our fourth area of insight highlights the important ingredients of student achievement, students' perceptions of being challenged, and whether they experience their teachers' support to develop the work habits they need to meet those challenges. As you can see, our analysis revealed that students overall were slightly more likely to report in fall 2020 that they were being challenged to correct their mistakes, with an increase from 64% to 68%. Knowing the importance of correcting mistakes and mastering all subject areas, and especially in math, we were heartened by this positive direction in the data and saw an opportunity for lift. Here again, though, we would like to couple this opportunity for lift with a challenge by again more deeply investigating this question to ask which students report that they learned to correct their mistakes. In this instance, again, we find that students who report earning A's are statistically more likely than other students to report that they learn the critical work habit of correcting their mistakes.
So our final insight that we would like to share with you today is about those teacher supports that Jen mentioned. Now, for the question, how many of your teachers are willing to give you extra help on schoolwork if you need it? We see a 9% increase from pre-COVID to fall 2020. 2/3 of students last fall reported that their teacher is willing to give them extra help. Now, again, we see an opportunity here to continue to fuel this important trend upward, to continue to make sure that teachers are available to students to help them when they need it. We recognize that we must approach this opportunity with some caution because it also presents a challenge. Now, on this point, we would like to editorialize a little. So we've seen in the media and heard stories from educators that they are working day and night to support their students to make sure that they are providing the best education possible given the circumstances. And as you all know, many of them are overextended. So while we want to make sure that our students feel that their teachers are there to help them, we also need to loop back to our first insight and remind ourselves that teacher expectations and teachers are also embedded in the culture of schools. So we must also prioritize their social and emotional well-being if we hope to support students through and out of the pandemic. Now, as we dive deeper into this question, we identify more challenges. When we look back at our aggregate data set, we see that there is a statistically significant difference between the proportion of white students who report that their teachers are willing to give them extra help as compared to Hispanic, multiracial, and Black or African American students. Now, while the effect size of our sample is small, we also note that Asian students report receiving extra help at a comparable level to their white peers. Now, as this graphic suggests, extra help is capital, and most of it is falling into the hands of white students.
All right, we hope that these quick 5 insights have prompted your thinking about the student experience through COVID and how we might learn from the profound experiences of our students through this trying time. Many of the insights and cautions that we shared are ones that we are hearing daily as we work with intrepid educators who continue the good work of listening to and learning from their students through the pandemic. Thanks to all of them, we can all profit from the insight that students' perceptions from relationships with teachers and teacher expectations have improved over the last year. We hope we have also inspired you to do some of this work on your own in your own school, and we are, of course, here to help if and when that's the case. So now we're happy to take any questions or hear any comments, which you can put in the chat and which Sonia will chime in with.
We did have a couple of great questions come in from the chat. I'll start with one from a participant who directs this question specifically to you, to Dr. Jen DeForest. So the question comment is, you shared that you're a former school leader and a researcher, so I'm sure that you can relate to the challenge of translating research into practice with instructional leads. So Jen, do you have a recommendation about how to take this data to teachers specifically, especially, so there's some notes about how it could be a potentially difficult conversation, and then especially around the relationship between teacher mindsets and students' experiences. So this is about taking this data back to staff, back to teachers. Any recommendations about how to frame that, how to go about it, and resources from YouthTruth?
Yeah, what a phenomenal question. I mean, just to start, the supposition behind that question around the incredible importance of teacher mindsets as predictive and key ingredients in student achievement, I so appreciate it. It's one that is blowing up in the research, and as an instructional leader, it is really close to my heart. So yes, this kind of data can be very powerful when working with researchers. And of course, one of the things that we want to think about as we build that data analytic muscle with researchers is approaching it in a way, as Jimmy mentioned, that recognizes that they're also emotional beings within the context of school who need time and space and supports to be able to turn this data into action. We are really proud and prize our questions within our instruments that are actionable. So we break our factors like relationships and expectations, as you saw, down into questions that teachers are able to really see as tools within the construct that are formative and not summative. So when we look at the questions around work habits, for example, these are great ones that can immediately be addressed with really specific tactics within the context of school. Those are great places to start with educators because there are ways to actually follow up on the data and it doesn't feel hopeless. So I hope that's helpful.
Thanks, Jen. We're just going to keep working through the great questions that are coming in. So the next participant says that they're thinking a lot about equity and they're wondering about that powerful data point that Jimmy walked us through about how white students are more likely to say that their teachers are giving them extra help. The participant says, our district is just starting on our equity journey. What suggestions do you have about how to use this student voice data to drive equity?
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's one of the things that is really important that we recognize in our mission is making sure that we are hearing from every single student. Oftentimes when you're starting your student voice work, you want to go directly to your student council or to your student leadership teams, but doing something like a simple climate and culture survey allows every single student to be heard. And then that, after you get that data back, there's so much power in the ability to be able to disaggregate that data. When you're just looking at your data as a whole, looking at your aggregate school data, you're looking at what the majority of students are saying. That's what your overall data is implicating. But when you have the power to be able to disaggregate, then you can see if there are any, what we call at YouthTruth, experience gaps in your data. So you can see if students of different backgrounds are having similar or different experiences in school. And that's when you can start creating some interventions to make sure that you can close those gaps in the student experience. And again, a lot of this data is a place to jump off for more questions. So once you do get that data back, it's really important that you begin to dive into it, gather your students and ask them, why does this data look the way that it does? And what can we do to help?
Thanks, Jimmy. Okay, so then there's a follow-up question to that. Jen D, you spoke about the work of translating this data to teachers. This question is about translating it to students and engaging students. How do you suggest using this data with students directly, or would you? How does this translate for the student audience, and how do you involve students with this data?
Yeah, another great question. We strongly suggest always closing the feedback loop and involving students in an inclusive meaning-making process. So the data really is just the starting place of the work. Taking it back into your community and with the students is what builds that outer ring of that castle framework and makes it more healthy as we build climate and culture through the process of analysis with students. So we firmly believe that student agency is a key ingredient in creating pro-social schools. We have lots of ways that we do this with students using protocols, images, inclusive conversation prompts, that starts to build this. And just as a footnote, where it's most effective is when you have structures within your schools that you can put the conversations that are going to keep them alive over time so it becomes part of your culture and it's not just episodic.
Thank you, Jen. And the final question that we have in queue is just about how YouthTruth is keeping a finger on the pulse of how students' experiences are changing during COVID with distance learning overall. What can we expect to see in the weeks and months to come about what we're learning and what we're hearing from students directly?
Yeah, we are continuing to work with school districts across the country, helping them better understand the experiences of their students, families, and staff. And one of the really exciting things that we have coming up, actually, is we're gathering a lot of this aggregate data, doing some analysis about some of the bigger differences, not just in relationships, but in other parts of our core survey, like we mentioned in the beginning, students' perceptions of engagement, academic challenge, belonging, emotional and mental health. And we're actually going to be presenting more of those findings. I believe is that in March, Jen, that we are going to be doing that? So we're going to be presenting that in March. So those attending today, you got a great look at relationships specifically, and we're going to be doing more of an analysis that we can talk through in March as well. So stay tuned for looking your email so that you can RSVP to that webinar too.
So that's a wrap for the questions that have come in. Thank you so much. Feel free to continue to add them either to the chat or to the Q&A feature. I'll kick it back to Jen and Jimmy to close us out.
Great, thank you, Sonia, and thank you everyone. What great questions, and we appreciate your time this morning. We hope that we've offered you some food for thought around opportunities for insight, where we need to look deeper for challenges in cold water, particularly as we think about equity as we move in and through and hopefully out of the pandemic. And we much appreciate all your time and wish you a really lovely weekend. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.